For the demonstration, I took a very thick yarn. Here you can see the needle size, which is recommended 6 to 7. I have some 7 needles here. These are circular needles, but you can also use straight needles for this project. It's not going to be very long. We will be knitting a rectangle, which is about 30 centimeters long. I just want to show you how to find out, depending on your yarn, how many stitches you should be casting on. So here, most of the yarns will have a recommendation. It looks like a little square, and it says 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, which is also 4 inches by 4 inches. There will be 12 stitches for 10 centimeters. So I recommend about 30 centimeters, maybe a little bit more. 3 times 12 is 36. So just to be on the safe side, I'll take 40 stitches to cast on. That's the explanation to this little symbol on the wool. So let's start our project. How much will we need to cast on? I want to leave a long tail, use it to actually sew the edges. Wrap 40 stitches around the needle. The shorter end will be here, and I will wrap it around my thumb, and here is the thread that goes to the yarn ball. I will create some tension and pull it around my point finger. And what I want to do is I'm just going to do like a slingshot into there. That's all we're going to do, and twist. So this is like my first loop of the cast on. And then what I have this V now. I'm holding the end of the thread with my other 2 fingers, pinky finger, middle finger, whatever you feel comfortable. Just hold that tight so you have your tension here. And through the slingshot action, I have like a V, and I have a loop here. So what I want to do for the cast on is go inside, close to my thumb, grab the thread and pull here. So again, this is one of the hardest parts of actually knitting, getting started. So go to your thumb, go into that hole and pull the thread that is coming from your pointed finger through that hole. And as soon as you got that, you want to let go and pull it tight. Now, how I pull it tight is I actually just use my thumb that was freed and push it with my thumb towards me. So when I push this and go into my slingshot mode, again, I have the setup as before, and I have 2 cast on. So let's try it again. Let's go to the thumb, pull the thread into the hole, release the thumb, and the thumb, what I'm going to do is just use it to push that thread towards me and tighten that all up so that I have my 3rd cast on. So this we will repeat for 40 times. So I'll meet you when I have 40 stitches. So if you lose your threads, you know the front thread always has to go around your thumb, and the back thread goes around your pinky, your pointed finger. Make sure that you keep the shorter end, the end that's not going to your yarn ball, keep that secured away. So what I mostly do is I wrap it around. I make a small yarn ball and go around here, twist it, and just push it around. So then I know for sure I don't accidentally take this to knit. So now I have 40 stitches. So this is your long cast on. And now we want to turn the work. So if it's your other needle, you will just put the needle into your left hand and take your second needle. So in this case, we have circular needles, so my second needle is attached, but it really doesn't matter. If you have two needles, just feel comfortable. This is your second needle and this is your first. So what we want to do is the first stitch you'll probably learn, I don't know, wherever you at. If you have knitted before, you can just hop on and do all kinds of stitches. Right now I'm doing for absolute beginners. So if you're an absolute beginner, you want to learn how to do your knit stitch. So the first stitch is always a little bit different, and if you're an absolute beginner, try to keep your stitches also very far from the end, because the most dangerous part for a beginner is when they lose the stitches, because making this mistake is very hard to repair for absolute beginners. It's the hardest part of knitting. Why actually some people say crocheting is easier than knitting, because if a stitch falls in crochet, it's like not as bad as when it happens in knitting. So because in knitting they unravel very quickly. How to hold your yarn. We have the stitch, this first stitch, and we want to take it. What I do is I put it through my pinky and then I take it with my pointed finger. So with my index finger, for absolute beginners, if you have problem like holding this yarn, that it's very secure, if you're like, oh, I can't seem to hold it, it's always slipping away, then I recommend to actually put it once or even twice around your index finger. Now be careful, you don't want to cut your blood circulation. So if you can just do with two, do with two. If you need three, do three, but just don't let your index finger turn blue. So what we want to do with the first stitch of the row, you just pick it up and put it on the other needle. So that's all you do with the first stitch. Now the second stitch, as I said, don't put them too close to the end. That might get an anxiety. Try to keep close together here. So try to keep the finger right behind the needle and hold the needle tight with your hand and your thumb, like you're holding the stitches with your thumb so that they don't fall off. And here I'm even, if you see, I kind of automatically hold my thumb and my index finger so that these don't actually slip off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the front of the loop. So here's the front of the loop. I'm going to, either you can wrap it around, but actually I recommend so that you just pull it through. So that's why you need the tension, because if you don't have the tension here, let's say I'm just holding it like this, then it's very hard. It's going to slip around. I don't have control over my needles, so somehow everything feels wobbly and inconsistent here. So that's why we're wrapping around the yarn and keeping this all like we have control. And then we go into the front of the loop here and we pull through. So the bigger your yarn, that's why I recommend to really take thick yarn as an absolute beginner, and also a color you can see very well. Then we just pulled it through and you have your first knit stitch. Now let's do that again. Okay, I'm an absolute beginner, so I'm going to take the next loop, put it here, isolate it a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. I find the entrance, and then once I got the entrance, like here you can see from all sides, I'm just going to take that yarn and pull it through. And once I pulled it through, it's still kind of like stuck on the other needle, so all I do is I take it off the needle. Make sure your loops here are far enough in the back, not that they accidentally slide off, because that's what makes knitting hard, to keep the stitches on the needle. So then all we're going to do is repeat and repeat. So I'll meet you at the end of the row. You have 40 stitches to practice with. So just continue and I'll meet you at the end of the row. So these are your first knit stitches. So now we come to the end of the round. So I want to like show the difficulties. I hope like you were able to grab through the loop and grab the yarn. And even with the last stitch, we do the same. So then we have all the stitches on our second needle or on the circular needle. And what we do now is what we also did with the cast on. We just turn the needle. We take it from our right hand, turn it around so that the pointy side is on the right side. And as you can see, so it's actually the same as before. We have these stitches on the needle. We don't want them to slide off our needle, so just keep them nice and in the back. And all we want to do is put these stitches to these stitches, to this needle. So what we do again, we take the yarn, depending on how much control and tension you need, wrap it around twice. And here we have the first stitch. The first stitch, I mean, you can also knit it, like you can put the yarn to the back and knit it like this, right? It won't make such a nice edge, but it's also like, for the scrunchie, it doesn't really matter. But if you want to practice it, you can already start like, keep the yarn in front, slip your first stitch over, and then we want to put the yarn to the back. For knitting, for the knit stitch, the yarn is in the back. So what we do now is the same as before. This will give you a nice garter stitch. So we see the purls are here. If we knit on that side, we will have a purl here. And now we're knitting on this side. So just continue practicing your knit stitch. That's all we want to do as an absolute beginner. So I'll meet you back at the end of the row. If you accidentally pull it over, maybe you just saw that I pulled it over like this. It accidentally, oh my gosh, I didn't knit it. It's like, what do? You just take the left needle, insert it from this side, and put it back onto your left needle. So again, oops, it went off. So what do? I didn't knit this, so I go in and push it on the other needle. Go in from this side, pull it on the other needle. Okay, so I'll meet you back at the end of the row. So we came back to the end of the row. I have all my stitches on the right needle. So what I do is I turn my work again, and I take my second needle or the other end of my circular needles, and I just slip that first stitch, have the yarn in front, slip it, and then put it to the back. And then, so from now on, I recommend for absolute beginners you can do this 10 centimeters. So we are starting to get a rectangle. So if I open this up, you can see we are starting to get a rectangle. These are our first stitches, and the more we knit, the higher it will get. So for absolute beginners, if you're having trouble with the knit stitch, just continue knitting. Just do the knit stitch row for row. The most important with knitting is to get the feeling and the repetition to do the stitch. It's like muscle memory, what we're building up here. So if you haven't knit before, I would recommend even to do the whole scrunchie just in this pattern to get a good basic feeling of how to knit, how to do the knit stitch. So I'm going to do 2 more rows of this and show you how it should be looking like about, and meet you back in a few. So we are now on our 5th row, and I want this pattern on the other side to be stockinette. So what I'm going to do, normal as before, just slip the first stitch. And now instead of knitting the row, I want to purl. So what do I do with purling? So I've learned how to knit Continental. I know that some find it harder because you need to keep the tension, but this is just how I've learned it since elementary school. So what you want to do is you have both of your needles, and instead of going in the front of the loop, what we want to do is go inside from right to left, and we keep our yarn in front of the needle. So everything that happens is we're going to the back, like through the right side of the stitch. Let me show you from all different sizes. So here we're kind of just poking into this first stitch, and you want to avoid picking up any other threads. So we just put the needle into this loop, and now we have like the yarn somewhere here in front. So what I normally do is I wrap it around this needle and hold it and push it through. So how I wrap the needle around, I also do this counter movement, and I hold the thread to go back. And then this is how we're actually pulling the thread through the loop, and then you just take it off the needle. Let's try that again. So I push through, I pull, I wrap it around the needle, I hold it and just push the needle through. Now this is the way that I had the habit to do. I always pull it tight so that the tension is the same. Now, what else you can do is the beginning is the same. You go through the loop, get your loop, and what you can do instead of wrapping around and everything is you can just like keep the thread around that needle and put your index finger down. So by putting it down, you also wrap it around the needle. I don't know if you can, hope you can see it well. And by pulling this down, I just put the tension so I have enough tension that it can go through. So this is all tight, so I feel the thread, and then you can pull it off. So this requires you a little bit more exercise for your index finger, but for some it might be more feasible. So let's do that again. I go through the loop. My thread is still in front of the needle, but I'll pull it around. So yeah, if you go down like this, nothing will happen. So you have to make sure that it's like in between those needles. So you feel it, like when you tug on it, you feel the tension pulling down on your needle. So when you pull it down, you push through that loop. You see, it could only almost fall off. So if that happens, just take your yarn again and just go through. You can even turn it to see it better, and then like push it down here and push it through the open part. Now you can see, even when you want to continue, something doesn't feel right, everything's going to fall off. So that's an indication that you haven't pulled down your stitch yet. Okay, just to show you again, pull it down, pull it through, and take that stitch off. So again, the thread is in front of the needles, then between the needles, and pull it through. And even if you let the tension go, it should be fine to pull it off. Just be careful not to work too close to the ends, otherwise your loops can fall off. Okay, so again, here I'm going through and pulling down, through, pulling down, through. If you preferred the method I showed you before, it was wrapping around and holding it, pulling it through. Make sure you just have one. That's also perfectly fine. Both methods. There's even some other methods how to do it, but these are generally the two that I teach. And when we look at the others, like from here, it doesn't look much different for a beginner, but on this side we will see that there's 2 rows of knits, and after we did this a few times, you'll see the difference. So let's continue to the end of the row, and I'll meet you back when we finish the row. So we have come to the front of the work again. So this is where I'm trying to build up some stockinette pattern. We see that the thread looks a little bit weird here. Now don't worry about this too much. But if you want to practice how to make these nice V's on the side, what you would do here after purling is you keep the thread in the back, you slip the first stitch, and then you can continue your work. So as absolute beginners, we want to wrap it around twice. And now maybe you have already noticed, so these V shapes or like hooks around is a knit stitch. You can tell the purl has its name. It looks like a little pearl. It looks like this. So we want to continue in knit stitch and have a stockinette, have many of these on top of each other. So this next row is going to be a knit row. You can practice your knit stitches. So oops, I pulled it over, push it back on the other needle. This can warn you as an absolute beginner, you have your stitches too far in the front. So just push them back a little before you lose them, and then go back in front, pull it through, and do a knit row. This is really good, stockinette is really good to practice your knitting and then purling, because you have one full row, so you'll have 40 stitches to practice your knit stitch, and then you'll have 40 stitches or 39 to practice your purl stitch. So I'll meet you at the end. So we just finished our row of knit stitches here. I just want to show you again how much we have already knit. So we are here at already 4 centimeters. So let's continue doing stockinette. Now we turn the work again. We turn the work and start purling again. So pulling, slipping it over, keeping the thread in the front, wrapping it through, pulling over. Or if you decided to do the other one, this is what it will look like. And if you can't build up that tension on your yarn, remember to do it 2 or even 3 times and try to build up that tension, because the tension is what actually makes the Continental knitting sometimes a bit harder, because it feels like the yarn is loosely around. But once you have that in your muscle memory, it will be much easier and faster. So here at the end, if you want to make your life easier, you can always just knit this last one, and then it will always be the same on how to slip stitch this. So now we're coming to our next rows, and you can just actually continue this. It's a very good practice for absolute beginners. If you want to practice alternating some stitches, I recommend like a checkbox, or that you do, for example, here I did 5 stitches purl, 5 stitches knit, and then after a certain amount of rows you can switch that up. This helps you get into counting and making diverse patterns with just knit and purl. So there's plenty of patterns you can do just with these 2 stitches. You can do a seed stitch, a moss stitch. Let me show you how you can create like little stars or pearls in the middle. Let's try that. So what we will do is we'll slip the first stitch and I will knit 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's say I want to create a star or a pearl here. So all I do is I go same thing, even though the stitch underneath looks a little bit different, it's the same thing. You go into the needle and into the stitch from the back. You pull the thread in front and pull it off. So now you notice that you have like a little pearl. Some people use it to kind of represent stars in a pattern. So what I would do is just always knit 5 create a purl. There you have it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a purl stitch. And then we have 3 going towards the end. And there you can see it's just like a little sparkle in the middle. So the next row I'm just going to purl along, and no matter what stitch comes, because I actually want that stitch to be a little bit different, just to interrupt the pattern, just to look like one of those stars in the sky. And so I don't do anything different in this row. I just continue purling the whole row. See, my scrunchie is getting along, and maybe I want to create a sparkle exactly here, like so that I have that same one in the middle of these two. So what I'll do in this row is I'll count 2, create 1, and then have 5, create 1. So let me show you. Again, the first one we slip, then I knit 2, and I want the purl to be here. So I purl, and then I will knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I want it to be exactly in the middle, so here I'll do a purl and then knit. You can be creative, like you can do it randomly as well. It doesn't have to have a certain pattern. I'm just showing the different examples how to achieve this. Okay, so now we've gained some height. Let me just compare. We're heading towards 8 centimeters. So if I check down here, I had 2.5 centimeters for this last part. Now you can decide if you want it symmetrical, then you might want the same pattern here as here. If you, for example, think, oh, I had enough knit stitch practice and I really want to dig into purl, I will show you how you can achieve this pattern, the same looking pattern, just up here with the purl stitch. So if you really want to deep dive in purl stitching, I know it's kind of annoying even for advanced knitters, but I'll just show you how to get that practice in so that you can do that muscle memory to become a more consistent knitter, because most people don't like their knitting or think, oh, I'm a beginner knitter, because their stitch work is uneven. And how to get even stitch work is practice and muscle memory. So it's about paying attention. Your attention is always the same, and the best practice for that is just knitting a lot of stitches. And this scrunchie is actually a great project for that. It's not too big. Like many people say, your first project should be a scarf. I'm actually not a fan of that, because at the beginning your stitch work isn't very clean, and so out of a rectangle becomes like an uneven rectangle, and then people feel obliged to wear the scarf. Whereas with the scrunchie, even if it were irregular, you put it in your hair and you don't really even see every exact stitch. So that's why I think this makes such a good absolute beginner project, because it's handmade. You have a finished project and practicing piece, and it's not that bad if you slip a stitch, if something accidentally happens, if you put a purl instead of a knit stitch. it will disappear in the project and you won't even see it. And let me show you how you can get some practice creating this garter stitch with purl stitches. So first stitch I'm going to pull over, and here I'm just going to purl the whole row. Purl, purl, purl. So just do a whole row of purling, and actually that's it. So let me meet you at the end of the row and show you how the second row is done. But actually all you do is purl the whole rows. But I'll meet you back and show you. Finishing that row of purls. So this is symmetrical to this. Now we want a knit stitch row. A row that looks like knit stitch on here, which means we just do a purl row here. So let me just show it to you. Okay, so we want to purl these stitches. Any preferred way you purl. And I'll show you. On this side, this side will actually look the same as that side. So I'll continue and finish this off and meet you to show you how to bind off. Okay, so now I'm getting to the last row. In the last row of my rectangle, I am slowly, I got about 10 centimeters down, so I'll just bind off now. So what I want to do in the bind off is I want to get all the stitches closed and off the needle. So let me show you how to do that. We're going to do it with the purl, so it's going to look a little bit more complicated, but it's the same thing with the knit stitch. So as before, we take the first stitch off, and we are actually just doing the same as before. So you are doing a knit stitch, a purl stitch here. So we're doing a purl, and now instead of continuing, what we're going to do is we're going to take our needle, pull through the first loop, and now carefully, if you need the support, as an advanced knitter, I can just pull it over and be careful that it doesn't fall. But if you're an absolute beginner and are kind of, I don't want to let that stitch fall, then what I recommend is put your stitches very far on the bottom of the needle. Then take it and use your thumb or something to help you. Just hold that other loop and while you pull it over. And when you come to the point of the needle, just, nobody's going to watch you, so nobody is judging. So just hold it until you release that loop and then let it fall. And there you go, your first bind off. So let's see that again. With the knit stitch, it would be the same. You would just do like a knit stitch first and then do the bind off. But here we want to do a row of purl stitches. So I'm going to do my purl stitch. Then I have 2 on my right needle. I'm going to push them far off from the needle point. I'm going to poke my needle in here, put tension, and just like as soon as you can see that other loop, hold it, and then slowly move it, pull it off, and let it go. And there you have your second bind off. So again, without the dramatic, and pull it over, hold it, pull it through. Try to keep it nice and loose, otherwise this will like smush together, but since we're doing a scrunchie, it's not not going to ruin your work if it's too tight. So pull it over, purl, pull it over. So practice this, go as slow as you need to go. Most important, don't let the stitches fall. Okay, so I came to the last stitch, so I just wanted to show you it's not very different from anything else. Here I'm just like knitting, or you can purl, doesn't really matter. And again, I'm just pulling the last stitch over, the second to the last stitch over the last stitch. Now I have this stitch, just make it big, so that it doesn't accidentally open. And I'm going to sew these parts together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure about maybe 2 times, at least 2 times, and give it a little more to breathe, to sew that part. And then, like as you saw, I just cut it. So now with this loop, you just want to pull the thread, the cut yarn through there, and then it's like fastly secured. So this is already our basic for the scrunchie, and now we're finished with our knit rectangle. It's about 10, maybe even 11, I would just say 10 centimeters high and 34 centimeters. Okay, so we got quite a bit there, but it doesn't matter. My last one was 26 and it was a little bit short because it's curling, but it's still okay. We will use this thread to sew the smaller part. So what does matter is the side that's supposed to be outside of your scrunchie, so showing should be inside the fold, right? So if this is the part you want to show, then you will fold it like this. If you think, hey, I really like this side better, then you would fold it like that. So I want this side to show, so I'm going to fold like this. This is the end that I measured to do the long side. Sometimes you pull it from the wrong side and you'll have a knot if you don't be careful. So I will pull the thread through here, no knot. You can sew this closed how you like. I like to use the mattress stitch, but feel free to use anything you feel comfortable with. It's not really a great impact. So I just go through those V's, go 2 ahead and then 1 back. Don't pull it too tight. 2 ahead and 1 back. And then I will cut the yarn here. And we have our first end sewn in. So when we did this, we created like somewhat like a tunnel, a tube, whatever you may want to call it. And what we will do with this is we will scrunch it up so that we can take the rubber band and pull it over. So we basically want to get the rubber band over this material. And when we did that, we want to unfold it and take both ends, because this is what's going to make the scrunchie become a scrunchie. So we secured the rubber band inside, close, sew around this edge, all around the scrunchie. So that's what we will do next. I'll put my yarn into the darning needle. And here we have the beginning. We can go into both directions. Since this looks so open, I'll just go into this direction. Now this will show a little bit, so you might want to try to make it look a little nicer. Like before, the stitch is inside, so we won't really see it, but now it's going to be outside, so we want to make it look nice. I'm going to catch both V's, go back, and then go 2 in front. So 2 in front, 1 to the back, 2 in the front, in the back. So now I came to the end of the round. I'll just go for a few more stitches back, and then you can actually cut the yarn, and there we have our scrunchie. The thicker the yarn, the thicker the scrunchie would be. You could also give it a few centimeters more and make it wider, all depending on what you would like to create. I do recommend starting with a thick yarn as a beginner because you underestimate how many stitches it actually is, and for impatient or easily frustrated people, it becomes not a nightmare, but kind of like feeling like a never-ending story. And I always think a first project in a new craft should be small and easy and give a quick success, and then you can experiment with doing smaller yarns, and maybe also taking a smaller rubber band or a bigger rubber band. You can create these, and it didn't take up much of our yarn, so I would say about 25 grams, maybe 20 meters, 25 meters. But it all depends on what kind of needle size you use and so on. But that's the tutorial for an absolute beginner. And the scrunchie, even if you make a few mistakes, is always a forgiving project. Thank you for joining me on this project. So if you like this tutorial and want more similar advice, then just subscribe and like the video. Thank you, and have fun with your scrunchie.